Thank you very much. Thanks, Dirk, and all the organizers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I really love the conference so far. I felt very welcome by the organizers and everyone attending. So thank you so much for that. I really love the footprint measures as well. I had to come by plane from Madrid, but otherwise I'm taking the train as much as I can. So what is the topic of this talk today? Beyond engineering, the future of platforms. There are two main things that I'm going to talk about. The first is kind of more aspirational, if you like. What might be the future, some kind of future for platforms when we look at it in a broader scope than just engineering. So don't worry if some things might feel like sort of science fiction or something like that. It's totally normal. The sort of halfway, I do a kind of intermission where I'm talking a little bit about platform engineering, where we are today, what are the things I've seen that are working and some that maybe are not working as well yet. By the way, I drink a lot of water during the talk, so. So, as Dirk mentioned, I'm one of the authors of the book Team Topologies, which is almost 5 years old now, which is crazy to think how fast that went. And so what's interesting is that before Team Topologies, there is something called DevOps topologies. I don't know if anyone has heard of DevOps topologies. Few people. So if you look it up, there's a website and there were some articles we created. This was back around 2013, 2014. And more or less at that time is when I started going to DevOps Days conferences as well. So if you are familiar with, which I think you all are, with the sort of the origins of DevOps, sort of started in 2009. As Dirk mentioned, Patrick Debois was one of the main architects of the DevOps movement. And it was meant always a sort of umbrella topic, right? It was not specifically about tooling or specifically about how do we organize ourselves in teams. It was anything that helped improve the work of the teams, especially development and operations teams, of course. So it's interesting that only a couple years ago, Patrick, who is a very humble man, he never wants to be in the spotlight, and so he resisted for a long time to give a definition of DevOps. So the fact that he did come up with one, basically, 2 or 3 years ago, means that he really thought hard about it, and it's not something out of the blue. And so what he said is that his definition of DevOps is everything you do to overcome the friction between silos. All the rest is plain engineering. So this is interesting. I think it is a really good approach to think about DevOps, because you might have many different kinds of frictions, right? So if you've been around long enough, you probably remember a lot of friction in terms of this ping pong between development and operations. Oh no, it's your fault because you didn't write the proper operations documentation, or it's their fault because they didn't deploy correctly the application to production. All this ping pong, this blame back and forth was quite typical, unfortunately, about 20, 15 years ago. Another kind of friction that was very common is not providing the right tools for engineers to do their work. So all the focus we have today, which is great, on developer experience, on how do we improve the workflows for the engineering teams, how do we make it easier for them to do their job. This was basically non-existing 15 years ago in most organizations. And the third friction is to consider what is the cognitive load on the teams that have to do this complicated software development work, where you have a lot of things you need to know about. You need to know about the business, hopefully, and the users. What are we trying to do? How are we trying to help them? What is this software or this product going to do for them? And you have to know all the technical aspects, all the tooling, the software development lifecycle, a lot of things. So we now have more awareness that we need to find ways where we can manage this cognitive load better. Otherwise, teams are just overwhelmed all the time, and in the worst case, the people become burned out and might leave, which is the worst case scenario. So I wanted you to think a little bit in this talk about what happens outside of engineering. Basically, we've done a lot of progress in engineering, sort of addressing to some extent these frictions, but what happens outside of engineering? And so, in fact, the ways of working outside engineering directly or indirectly impact the flow of value, our ability to get value to our customers through software, through services that we provide. And in my experience, most organizations are not aware of this, or some people are aware and don't have the ability to change, and other organizations are basically oblivious to the impact on flow. So basically what we have often is something like this. And I'm not trying to portray engineering as this amazing, we solve all the problems, but we have made a lot of progress, maybe out of more necessity, more frustration. We've made a lot of progress with DevOps, Agile to some extent. And hopefully team topologies has helped as well, sort of helping us think about what are ways of working and organizing ourselves that help improve the flow, help teams be able to provide value to the business and to the customers faster, more effectively. And so when you look at the rest of organizations, especially in medium to large organizations, a lot of other departments are not aware of these ideas of fast flow. They're not aware of these principles of decoupling things that should not be coupled, having high cohesion inside a given service that they provide, using sort of self-service patterns to make it easy for others to find out how to get whatever their expenses submitted or their holidays booked, or contracting some provider or something like that. There's not much awareness of these ideas of what helps us get to faster flow, right? If you think back to those frictions we were talking about outside of engineering, blame culture, people blaming other departments, other teams, yes, check. Poor tooling, that those emails where, no, you have to check the other email, the other version that is final, version 2, that's the one you should follow, not the version 1 that was in the previous email. Those kind of things, right? Where it's not really thought out, how do we provide these things to other people in our organization. And the last one, also check, just making it complicated for their peers to understand what process do they have to follow. Oh, I have to contact this person, but then I need to get approval from this other person. Or, I need to get some expense approved, but the only person who can approve it is out of the office for 2 weeks or a month. So remember to come back in 1 month. So all these things, although some of them might seem small, they add up to our cognitive load as well as we work inside the organization. So I had an interesting story where I did a little bit of work for a large clothes retailer. It was like about 10 hours of some workshop. And then when I looked at how much time, because I'm a nerd and I'm measuring how much time I spent on each thing, how much time I spent to actually get my invoice submitted, go through their process, get it approved by the person who had to approve it, it actually took about 5 hours. So 50% of the time, or in total, 1/3 of the time in that engagement was just to go through this kind of complicated process they had set up, which is not very clear, right? So what happens when you have these frictions? Let's assume even within engineering, things are going well. Obviously, there's still friction there sometimes. But when you look at the sort of engagement between teams in different parts of the organization, when you have these frictions, it ends up with people feeling like they're not autonomous to make decisions. For example, if they want to contract to use some third-party tool, if they have to go through a very complicated process of procurement. There are conflicts, there's frustration building in, and there's some disengaging between teams. So unless we kind of set them up differently, teams will tend to optimize for what I'm calling here low-value internal processes over high-value outcomes. So what this means is that a team in legal or finance naturally will optimize for their own internal processes, standardize them, make sure we can execute as quickly as possible. The more cycles that we can execute, the better. But they're not necessarily aware that standardization and the process that you set in place that is optimized for your team that owns the process is not necessarily helping the users of that process to go fast, right? So if you think, again, about a procurement process, or think about, you need to get an expense approved for a book you bought, and if you look at the cost of people who had to be involved in that process and the time, it's way more than whatever 20 euros that you paid for the book, right? Maybe it's 10 times more, or the cost of just going through that process. But this is a natural thing to do. It's not to blame those teams, but it's a natural thing to do unless you have more awareness of the impact on others, the impact on flow. So going back to this definition of DevOps from Patrick, what can we do to overcome these frictions that we're seeing across the organization? Well, one of the things that could be very helpful is to think about the platform as a product, as a key pattern to sort of overcome these frictions between effectively silos across the organization, not within engineering alone, but between engineering and other parts of the organization. So this pattern of thinking about what we offer as sort of platform that can be productized in the sense that we're thinking about, even if we're a legal team or finance team, what do we offer to others inside the organization, and how do we make it more of a product? So it's interesting. I don't know if Jennifer is here, but in her keynote yesterday, when she was talking about the SRE education at Google, that felt like a really good example of treating what you offer as a product, because they're thinking, for example, who are the user personas? What kind of engineers do we have to train around SRE? What kind of experience do we have? We have some industry experienced people, but who are new to Google, so they need to know more about the culture. Or we have people with sort of bad habits that we need to sort of re-educate to some extent. But it's just that mindset of thinking about, okay, we're not just offering some learning content and that's it, which might be the best content ever, but we need to think about who is going to consume them, and especially in medium to large organizations, there are very different sort of customers of what we're offering, right? Understand where they are, what do they need. So I've been talking about platform, so it's always good and platform as a product, to remember what that means. So I tend to follow this definition from Evan Butcher. A digital platform is the foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support arranged as a compelling internal product, right? So it's providing this thing in a product way, thinking about the users, providing support, providing knowledge, onboarding, all these things. So I have to make a confession, okay? I see platforms everywhere. Always thinking about this stuff. So what you see here, this is a platform to me, right? So I got this when I arrived at the speaker's dinner, and it's a speaker cheat sheet. And if you look at the back, this is really, we could think about this as a platform. It's very clear. It gives us guidelines to the speakers, where you need to be, what time, what is paid and not paid. So very clear sort of boundaries of what does this platform, if you want to think about it like that, of providing support to the speakers, what does it, what's included, what's not included, right? So the hotel bar is not included, unfortunately. So I cannot get drunk at the expense of DevOps days, but I could find an alternative, right? I can pay myself or go to a supermarket if I want to get some booze and get drunk cheaply. But basically, it sets very clear rules, and then it has the contacts information. So what is the communication channel? So if I need help, I have phone numbers I can call or WhatsApp, right? Or it could be an email, or they could tell us, send us a message if it's not super urgent. So it just lays out, okay, what do we offer? What is the interface for you? So I do think about this as a platform. I told you I have a problem. So part of this idea of platform as a product is obviously treating others as your customers. So even if we're talking about our peers, other people in the organization, if we think about them as customers, it kind of changes our approach to what do we offer and how do we offer it. So in fact, the platform can be just a wiki that improves flow and reduces cognitive load for the teams consuming it. So for example, I often get the question, I just had this question yesterday, these ideas from team topologies, different types of teams. I'm not going into detail now, but there are different types of teams, 4 types of teams. How do we do this in a startup, for example, where we only have 20, 30 people? We cannot have dedicated platform teams, for example. Well, the idea of the platform can already be there. It can be that maybe it's just your senior engineers that are providing some, like I said, a wiki page that has some sort of common configuration for some AWS services, for example, just to make it easy for new teams or new engineers to get up and running quickly, right? Okay, just let me follow this helpful documentation to get started faster, and not have to think about all the details. That's how we're reducing cognitive load in that scenario. And obviously, for many of these teams or groups I talked about, they might not have the ability to build actual software, and some of the platform they can provide is through properly thought out wiki information, for example. All right, I'll come back to this idea of treating others as customers outside of engineering. So now it's just time for intermission. I don't have the elevator music to make it cooler, but so I want to do sort of state of the union of platform engineering. Back in the day, like around 2012, 2013, when I started going to DevOps days, John Willis, if you're, I guess most people are familiar with the work of John Willis. He was also one of the pioneers of DevOps. You cannot miss him. He's a big guy, talks loudly, funny guy. And so he used to do a state of the union for DevOps in those early days. So he would be at almost every DevOps Days conference and sort of giving an update of what he was seeing, what was working, what was not working so well. So what have we gotten right around platform engineering or platforms within engineering, if we want to think about it like that? And be mindful, this is my sort of optimistic view on what we got right. It means at least I've seen some organizations doing this. So don't feel out of place if you think, well, we're not doing any of this in my organization. That's also totally normal to see. But in general, we start to see these platforms within engineering much more focused on user experience, on what people talk a lot about developer experience today, which is great. It means we're thinking about what are the right tools for the right users and the right use cases and different needs across engineering and so on. There is, this idea that I was talking about starts to be a bit more widespread of platforms as a key to manage cognitive load at scale. This means we can sometimes reduce some of the cognitive load through automation, through simplifying processes and things like that. But a lot of the time, what we really do is when you look at a group of teams, if you have teams that are focused on the users, on the product, and we can reduce their cognitive load, is through platforms, through pushing to platforms things that you don't want every product team to have to worry about, like how do we set up our monitoring, or how do we set up our deployment pipelines, those kind of things that if a good platform can take over, that's where you start to see those improvements and sort of management of cognitive load in a more effective way across multiple teams. So in 2021, Jennifer mentioned the State of DevOps report that has been around for several years. So it's a survey for hundreds or thousands of organizations. So in 2021, they actually asked a bunch of questions about the team setup. Do you have clarity on your types of teams, interactions between teams, and so on? And they found out that highly evolved firms, in terms of DevOps maturity, use a combination of streamlined and platform teams as the most effective way to manage cognitive load at scale. So this is based on the answers to that survey. And finally, we see platform teams with extensive product experience, right? Like really good product people inside the engineering platforms. No, this is just wishful thinking. Maybe they have some relevant platform product experience inside platforms. Also, still a bit wishful thinking. So we start to see, like, at least people I talk to inside the platform, people understand how important it is to have a really good product approach. And here I'm talking about the actual product development practices. So how do we create a roadmap? How do we prioritize? How do we communicate with the users? How do we figure out which needs are really the ones that we should address? And how do we do this in a consistent way and evolve the platform as a product, right? That's actually quite hard. And so that's something where we need a lot more focus on having really experienced people in product work inside the platform. So what are some of the things that we're still missing from my point of view? One thing I see often is the platform boundaries being very strict, and while they need to be more fluid. So what do I mean by that? What I see often is that we sort of prematurely define things as, okay, this is a common need, let's push it to a platform so every team can use it. And sometimes we do that very prematurely. And we make a lot of assumptions on what is common need for multiple teams. And so when it turns out later that actually what we thought was the common thing for all the teams, actually this team A actually needs this thing to evolve in a very different way from team B, from team C. And that's where the platform becomes a blocker, because now you have multiple teams that need changes to the platform to what's supposed to be a common functionality or service. And they have to do all this synchronization and waiting for the platform to evolve. And that's where, if we have a more fluid boundary, we say, okay, this was inside the platform before, but actually now we realize maybe it should be outside of the platform. And that's a pattern we almost never see. Someone saying, okay, this service or some functionality in the platform actually doesn't make a lot of sense, because different teams, for whatever reason, they work for different markets, or they've discovered new needs. They need the ability to change this thing by themselves outside of the platform, right? So if we have very rigid platform boundaries, we're not thinking in this approach that actually those boundaries should be much more fluid, then we might be blocking teams after all and increasing cognitive load instead of decreasing, which was the purpose. Another one is we need to be mindful of cognitive load on the platform teams themselves, right? There's a lot that the platform team typically has to deal with. They have to develop services, they have to operate them. Even if they're internal services, they need to operate and be reliable, performant, etc. Like I said, they need to focus on the product, understand the users, communicate, also do some marketing of what the platform provides. So I really like the example yesterday from how I forgot the name of the company, but how they were doing the releases using AI images and this funny names to the releases. That was pretty cool. I think that's a good example of how do you actually promote what you provide in a sort of attracting way, right? Not just those release notes, like a bunch of text that no one reads. Yeah. But we need to be realistic about the capacity and of the platform and organize around streams of value inside the platforms as well. And again, there might be things that in theory made sense in the platform, but we don't have the capacity. So for now, the what we call stream-aligned teams or product teams need to still take ownership of some things that, yes, at some point we would want to be part of the platform, but we don't have capacity now. So I'll do a shameless plug here to a tool we're developing called Temperature, but it's free for teams, so hopefully that's okay. Why? The point is that we now have ways to actually assess cognitive load on teams, and that's what this tool is trying to do, to help you get a feeling of what are the things that are the factors that are impacting cognitive load the most on teams, and then we can use this across both product teams and platform teams. And we can actually see over time, is the work and the value that the platform provides helping reduce cognitive load of the product teams using that platform, right? So I'm excited about that. And the last one is that trust boundaries strongly impact platform effectiveness. So we don't talk a lot about trust in engineering, I think, or not enough. And it's really important. So the way we design the platform and the way we communicate needs to be, in my opinion, optimized for high trust. So this might mean, for example, that if you're thinking about building some new service in your platform, maybe you should start by just helping teams learn more about that domain. Let's say, what could be a good example? Observability, some services around observability. If the teams in your organization are not even really familiar with observability or SRE, then you need to reach out to them first to kind of give them, help them understand, why is this helpful? Why would we want to use some sort of platform service around this? So you do more kind of enabling work, and that work is going to build trust with those teams, right? So when you actually have a service, it's going to be much easier for those teams to adopt that platform service. They already know you already help them understand what is observability or what is SRE, even if they're not applying it yet. So I like to say this, I think trust is the preferred currency for platform adoption. That's much better than, well, you have to use the platform because I say so, or you cannot do it in another way because it's going to cost too much. Sometimes those things need to happen, but if you can get adoption of your platform through trust, that's a preferred way. And there are other implications of this. For example, if you're working in a very large organization, let's say thousands of employees, and you want to have a platform that is centralized for everyone, that's really hard because it's going to be very hard to build trust with hundreds of teams from a centralized platform. That's where you need to think maybe of other patterns, like maybe we need to have sort of localized small platforms on top of the centralized platform, for example. So those local teams can build trust with the product teams in that local area. All right, that's it for the State of the Union on platform engineering. So remember, we were talking about, okay, how can other parts of the organization think about what they provide to others as a platform and treat others as customers. Let's look at a few ideas. Like I said, this is aspirational talk. Let's say you have compliance team or department. What would it mean to have compliance as a platform? And I'll explain the bananas in a minute. Maybe the compliance platform is not an actual, maybe it has some software, some simple software, but the kind of services that we probably would need is well, maybe we need a service that helps us search for regulations. Um, I have friends who work in banking, for example, and it's actually pretty complicated for a given, product team to understand all the regulations that apply when they're making some change to, to how your bank account works or anything like that. Um, and so, there are regulations in banking from, maybe the central bank in Europe, plus you have regulations from your national bank. I don't know if there's a Bank of Switzerland or similar name, right? They will tell what are the regulations. So it actually can get quite complicated. So maybe a service that just helps us search by, which regulations apply in this domain of my product, or and when do they expire if that's the case, and so on. That would be helpful. Maybe an auditing checklist type of service where if we know that we need to be compliant with some regulations, can we self-audit, right? Check if our service or product is following those checks that we know are going to be needed. So turns out that some organizations already do something like this. So the bananas part is because I was talking with someone at the conference, and they actually worked in an organization that does the labeling of the actual food items. And turns out that's not very simple, actually. While, for me, I look at the label on the banana, I think, okay, it's simple to understand. But actually, what they told me is actually there are multiple regulations involved. And what they were doing in that organization, they actually had a team, or I don't know if there were multiple teams, at least one, trying to provide something which I would call a platform, like make it easy for the people on the ground to actually find out which regulations apply, what kind of information needs to be on the labels and stuff like that. So that was pretty interesting. Another example, legal as a platform. It's actually this I realized from a conversation with not exactly a client, was a partner company that was going to participate in the prototype of that tool, Temperature, that I mentioned earlier. Basically, we need to sign an NDA with them, which is a very common thing, right, between providers and customers. But in this case, we needed the NDA to be bidirectional, right? We needed to be protected from, we're going to expose our IP to you during the prototype. So what was interesting is that in the email exchange with my contact, at some point I could see, this is a very large company in retail as well. I could see from the email thread that they were communicating with their legal team, and they sort of had a sort of platform, the legal team, where they said, well, again, it's mostly documentation and guidance, but like if you need an NDA, these are the kinds of NDAs we have for different situations. And you might have something similar for other types of contracts, right? So it's not to think that, well, now we can self-serve our legal needs. I would strongly advise against that. But some simpler use cases like signing an NDA or a statement of work, where you can get not just the templates, but some guidance on what you need to look out when you're signing this NDA with your supplier. So again, some examples to some extent of this happening. I do know that company has followed a lot of the ideas in team topology, so it was not super surprising that even the legal team was thinking about their work in a platform way. Leadership as a platform also could be interesting. What if we have some service that the leadership team is actually providing to the rest of the organization in terms of, hey, here are some strategy boards that can help you think about the strategy for your own product or service. What are the things you should be looking at? Or a metrics service so that we can help you understand what metrics matter to the business. How do you go about measuring those things? What shouldn't you measure? Stuff like that. Turns out at least one organization I know is doing something like that in Norway, a sort of smallish consulting company. They actually sort of try to adopt this platform approach to the whole leadership team. And so what they do is they help product teams actually, they not just provide this actual type of services with mirror boards and guidance on metrics, but they actually do onboarding and do sessions with the product teams. It's a very different approach where we're not telling teams, well, measure this and this and that, and they're actually helping the teams learn by themselves what they should be looking at. Company as a platform, they actually came from a conversation with someone on LinkedIn, and actually it's a group of companies, and one of the companies acts in this platform way, both for engineering type of platforms and non-engineering. This is an interesting approach where we're now at the company level, not just at the team level. I think there are some challenges to this approach in terms of trust, again, because now you're using services provided by an external company effectively, even if you're in the same group. So how do you build trust across those lines? It's not as easy. But on the other hand, it shows like we're committed to this approach. We making dedicated investment in the platform, and we're not gonna just suddenly shut down or reduce the platform because of temporary changes in the economy or what have you. So interesting pattern as well. What is the problem sometimes, even in this sort of advanced, if you like, thinking about these areas, is that sometimes they lack adequate team interactions. And because these platforms are not static, right? They're going to need to evolve. I'm just going to give you a couple examples where in that legal example, what ended up happening with that company that we wanted to prototype our tool is that the legal team said, no, we don't do, these are the only NDAs available. They were only one directional. They didn't sort of protect our IP, so they were not bidirectional. And there was no openness to change it or to find out that, well, what do we need? It was just, this is the way it is. So that's not the best approach, right? So in fact, the platform was not fit for this use case that we had, or that we and them had. So part of adopting this platform as a product mindset is being open to change and understanding platform will not always be the right thing, will not always provide the right use cases. So we need to occasionally collaborate with the other teams to figure out, okay, what else do we need, right? So that's also very important to make this work. So we're getting to the end, and I just wanted to sort of summarize a little bit the ideas and principles. At the end of the day, it's about playing well together, different teams, different types of teams, different parts of the organization. So I really like this quote from Byron Miller. He works at Red Hat. He was saying, this idea of the platforms and self-service is not that teams have autonomy doing what they want, is agency to operate within safety, within the encoded values that are jointly shared. So shared between platforms and product teams, shared between different parts of the organization if we can. So what are some of those principles? First, prioritize fast flow of value to our end customers. If everyone in the organization takes up this principle, and they actually try to apply it, maybe a lot of things would be different. We would start understanding more about the impact on flow of how we do our work, our processes, and so on. Focus on unblocking others through curated self-service patterns, right? So even that idea of having a wiki page and some guidance can be thought about as a platform in a self-service way, because people can now follow what you provided and understand what they need to do and not be blocked, right? If that documentation and guidance is properly done and curated. The platform should be open to change, or our platform is open to change, and we will collaborate to discover new needs. We're not assuming that we know exactly what others should do and what they need from our platform. We optimize for adoption discoverability, because if we build this great thing, platform, but then no one knows about it or no one finds out how to use it, then it's not worth very much. And finally, we enable others by meeting them where they are today, right? We understand that different teams have different experiences, different needs, and so we can't just assume that what we provide, that we can by ourselves in isolation understand and decide what others need. We need to reach out, establish trust, and meet them where they are. It's also interesting, and I don't mean this platform manifesto as, there's no website for you to sign up and say you agree. Okay, not yet. But this is more of an internal thing. If you can sort of codify or show what are the values, the principles that you follow in your platform, or maybe even across the organization, obviously inspired by the Agile Manifesto, what do you value? Then this not only helps internally the platform teams understand what is our focus, our mission, but also externally other people understand, okay, this is not sort of the traditional platform where you are mandating services that everyone must use. It's a very different approach, right? So yeah, if that could be interesting to think about internally, how do we actually codify to some extent our principles and the way we expect to work in this platform? So next time you come across this sort of divide that you see, well, other parts of the organization are not really thinking about fast flow and blocking others, maybe start building that bridge between these two sides, right? Maybe you can share an article or this recording, or anything that helps sort of make the first step for that person in sort of the other side, so to speak, to start understanding these ideas of faster flow, why it matters for the business and the organization. And finally, you can actually share with them these infographics we have about team topologies and fast flow, or anything that you think will spark their interest. So that's, and if they want to learn more, we also have an academy online, and the main website where we have a lot of resources. But again, it's not, obviously, we focus a lot on fast flow in team topologies, but can be anything that helps sort of start building that bridge with sort of the other side, where we often are just following processes and following what we have to do, but maybe we can take a step and just say, look, help realize what is the impact that the way other teams and other groups in the organization have on flow and delivery of value to our customers. That's it. Thank you very much.